All right, so as everybody is filtering in, I will get the boring logistic business stuff out of the way. Thank you all so much for coming tonight, both the people on panel and those just coming to watch. I'm Amanda, I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books. If you aren't familiar with us, we are an independent bookstore in the greater Boston area outside of Cambridge. If you haven't attended virtual events with us, welcome. We are so happy to be doing these because we get people from all over the world and we get to reach a wider audience than if we were doing events in store, though we do still miss them. So I will do introductions, some housekeeping stuff. It'll take about a few minutes, and then I will turn it over to everyone where they will have a, I'm sure, engaging, lovely discussion. At around 7:45 Eastern time, we will have a Q&A. If you would like to participate, we encourage you to do so. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. It looks like 2 speech bubbles. You can submit your questions there. It just helps keep track of them and gives us a little notification that there's a pending question so we don't miss it. But I will also be monitoring the chat. So if you forget or you can't seem to get it to work or some technological difficulties, I will be looking at the chat and keeping an eye on it. So don't worry too much about that. We have a pretty robust event schedule because everything's virtual, but we are winding down to the end of the year. So we have one more event tomorrow at 8, which is for Colleen Hoover and her psychological romantic thriller called Verity, which starts at 8 p.m. And then Thursday, we have our last story time of the year. We do a monthly story time where we have 3 picture book authors and illustrators come and read their books aloud. It's a nice way to wind down with your kiddos. So that's our last one of the year. And then that's it until January. So we hope you'll come back at the start of the new year for some even more events. We have a virtual cooking class starting in January. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and we hope you'll come back. As a reminder, you can buy Susan's book from us. We offer curbside pickup if you are not comfortable coming into the store. If you are, we are open for browsing and would love to have you. It's been a very good holiday season, and it's, don't you miss browsing a bookstore? But we also ship throughout the US. I think the cutoff has passed for Christmas, things to arrive in time for Christmas. Just keep that in mind, but we do offer shipping options throughout the US if you are not local. All right, let's get started. We're gonna start with introducing Elena. Elena Noureddine is PAIR's legal director and a staff attorney at PAIR, which stands for the Political Asylum Immigration Representation Project. Elena specializes in removal defense, criminal immigration, asylum, and special immigrant juvenile status. She is a recognized expert in detention and removal issues in unaccompanied minors cases and often participates in legal training and immigration-related outreach events. She received her BA in political science and criminology from the University of Florida. I feel so ashamed to say this, Elena, but I went to Florida State University. My brother is a UF grad, sorry. Elena also received her JD from Boston University School of Law. She joined PAIR in 2014. And then moving on to Susan, very accomplished, Susan J. Cohen. As founding chair of the Mint's immigration practice, Susan J. Cohen brings over 35 years of experience to her cutting-edge immigration practice. Cohen is the recipient of dozens of awards for her immigration work and contributions to our nation's immigration law, policy, and regulations. She is president of the board of the Political Asylum Immigration Representation Project, also known as PAIR. When Cohen is tirelessly working and advocating for immigrants and asylum seekers, she enjoys singing, songwriting, producing immigration-themed music videos, horseback riding, and traveling. She lives in Massachusetts. And for those of you who need a reminder, we are here to discuss Susan's book, Journeys from There to Here, Stories of Immigrant Trials, Triumphs, and Contributions. I will turn it over to the both of you, who will introduce Rosemary, who's sitting there patiently with us. And I will be back in a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. It's wonderful to be with you, and thank you to Belmont Books for hosting this event to celebrate the book and PAIR's clients like Rosemary and so many others who are discussed in the book, Journeys from There to Here. Rosemary, we're so grateful to you for joining us tonight. and sharing later some very personal, intimate details to convey to the audience, some of the principles and the ideas behind why I wrote the book, which is to show people the incredible fortitude and resilience, integrity and hard work and contributions of people just like Rosemary. So Rosemary and your family, it's an honor to feature you tonight. And I'm gonna just turn this back over to Elena for a moment to kick us off. And Elena, I think you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Rosemary, for being here today with us. And thank you to Belmont Books for hosting this great event and for everyone who is able to make it tonight. I wanted to share just briefly some background on PAIR for those of you who aren't familiar with our organization. PAIR is the leading provider of pro bono legal services to asylum seekers and immigrants who are unjustly detained by immigration, ICE, in Massachusetts. Our mission is to secure the safety and the freedom of asylum seekers and detained immigrants through providing high quality legal services. Today, there are over 1 million asylum seekers in the US, and Massachusetts has over 40,000. However, there's no right to free counsel in immigration proceedings, even though the consequences for our clients are life and death. Since its inception, PAIR has provided direct legal services and consultations to more than 11,000 clients from more than 90 countries around the world. We serve approximately 1,500 asylum seekers and detained immigrants every year. We provide free legal orientation, consultations, know your rights workshops, and representation in immigration cases. At PAIR, we constantly strive to empower our clients to share their stories, which is one of the many reasons I'm so honored to be here tonight and get to speak to Rosemary. I'm also really grateful that I get to do this event with Susan Cohen, our board president, author, and immigration lawyer extraordinaire, who has been instrumental in growing and advocating for PAIR and ultimately making it possible for us to serve more clients, which is our goal. So without further ado, I'll jump into asking Susan and then Rosemary questions, since that's what we're eager to do. So Susan, could you tell us why you decided to write this book?
I will, and I'll try to keep it short so that we can move on to Rosemary. That I wrote Journeys from There to Here in the years mostly in 2018 and 2019, during a time that was extremely difficult and dark for immigrants in the United States and for those of us who care about them and try to protect and defend them. The president at the time ran and governed on a pretty strong anti-immigrant platform. And he was choking off various otherwise legal routes for immigrants, including asylum seekers, but really all types of immigrants, skilled and unskilled, of every type of program, the services, the courts were being restricted, and judges were being hired on the basis of their political views instead of their ability to competently be judging immigration cases. Things were not going well, and I was very, very worried. And I wrote the book at a time when I was very worried about all of the immigrants who needed to try to cope with our system, and many who were being unjustifiably denied their rights, and families were being separated left and right, and people were being stranded abroad with approved cases and couldn't even come into the country because of the travel bans. So it was a difficult time. I wasn't sleeping, to put it mildly. I would pace my house every night, thinking about what could I be doing, what more could I be doing to try to counter a narrative that I saw playing out in the country, which was a narrative, unfortunately, with a lot of untrue rhetoric that was anti-immigrant and xenophobic in nature, very nativist platform that was fomenting very, ill-conceived and untrue stereotypes about immigrants, casting them in negative terms instead of in the wonderful positive terms that I know and we all know, those of us who work with immigrants, as the truth about immigrants, the vast majority of them. So this was the environment in which I decided to write Journeys from There to Here. I felt it as a calling, I would say, to do something more than just representing individual clients, because I thought about what's the way to counter broad brush stereotyping. How can you effectively do that? And decided that really the most effective way, like you said, Elena, is through storytelling. It's really only through the telling of individuals' personal, in-depth stories that people can get to know what immigrants go through and who they really are as human beings. And so I wrote the book for those reasons, mostly to show 3 important points: what so many immigrants have to go through, the struggles, the difficulties, and challenges, sometimes seemingly insurmountable challenges to their safety and their lives before they even get here. So they're so resilient and they come. And that's the one point. The second point is how hard our legal system is. And so many people don't really understand all the hoops people have to jump through and the ways that the options can be cut off through no fault of the immigrants, but because our government sometimes makes mistakes or curtails people's rights unnecessarily and sometimes illegally. So the system is really hard to navigate. And I thought showing in each person's individual case what the system is truly like as a person is winding their way through it, and having the reader walk along with them and see from step to step to step how incredibly difficult that is and anxiety producing it is. And 3, to show the amazing, incredible contributions that so many immigrants like Rosemary and her family and so many others featured in this book have made and continue to make in their communities and to the country as a whole. So really those 3 things was what I'm hoping that people will get from the book, intimacy in the immigration journey.
Thank you, Susan. And those of us who've had the opportunity to read the book, definitely first, and the stories are inspiring. Can you tell us who you would like to read this book? Who should read this book?
Well, of course, the first answer is everyone should read this book, right? But I actually think this book is more for people who are not so familiar with the immigration process. It's more for people who wonder what it's like and sometimes maybe doubt some of the stories they hear about immigrants, people who don't really understand or have someone close to them who's gone through the process. By reading the book, it's quite an eye-opening experience. And because there's so many different people featured in the book who have undertaken to get their status here, their permanent residence, green card status, through so many different routes and different, avenues in the law, not just asylum, but based on having extraordinary ability in their field or family relationships. Sometimes, as you can see when you read the book, family relationships that can go wrong. You can see and learn so much about our immigration system and see what it's like and what it feels like, because you feel it with the person when you're reading. You're really experiencing it alongside them, and it creates a connection that I'm hoping will be very strong between readers and the immigrant community. Yeah.
Thank you, Susan. So as I mentioned, each story, for those who've had the opportunity to read the book, each story in your book is really quite fascinating and inspiring. Would you be able to share with us a reading from your book?
Yes, I'm gonna read from the epilogue, everybody out there, and you'll know why in a moment. Several decades ago, I represented a wonderful but desperate man who was forced to escape an African country after being brutally persecuted for standing up for the civil and human rights of members of his community. He was a husband and a father of 5 children, but as in so many similar cases, he had to flee alone on short notice to survive. He left behind a professional, high-level job and arrived in the US practically penniless. As he was completely alone in a strange country, my family and I opened our home to him. And for years, he was a regular guest at our dinner table on Friday nights. We were successful in winning his asylum case, and many years later, after a very lengthy administrative immigration processing, we secured the approval of the applications of his wife and 5 kids to come to the United States and finally reunite with him. I'll never forget the day my husband, Michael, and our sons, Gabe and Noah, and I brought him to the airport to be reunited with his wife and 5 young children. We watched his lovely wife and their wide-eyed youngsters emerge from the international arrivals section of the airport. She radiated elation, so happy and grateful to be here with her family. Their reunion was a profound and deeply emotional moment for all of us. There's more in the epilogue about that woman and her family. And that woman, for all of you who are joining us tonight, I'm honored and proud to say is Rosemary, who is joining us tonight. And I'm going to turn this back over to Elena to ask Rosemary some questions. And I want everyone to know why we asked Rosemary, and that is because so many people hear about asylum seekers or people who had to flee and want to know their story and how their case went. And oftentimes, the questions that aren't asked are equally compelling and so important, which is, what happens when someone flees alone and the rest of the family is left behind? And that's a whole narrative unto itself. And Elena will start asking Rosemary some really interesting questions, very personal questions shortly. But it's important to understand the context that in our asylum law, when the person who has fled wins asylum, and that takes oftentimes many, many years in and of itself, there's a very separate, lengthy process we have to undergo to get the rest of the family over here based on having a family relationship to the person who won asylum. And so that is another world unto itself. What happens to those who are left behind waiting to see if they're going to make it and able to be reunited, which for many people is a big question mark. So I like Elena now to take back the virtual mic and take us into that territory.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for setting that up. Also, thank you, Rosemary, for being with us and for your willingness to share your story. It really is an honor for me, and I know that we'll all learn a great deal from anything you have to share with us tonight. So, Rosemary, Susan just told us about how your husband had a solid, well-paying job in his country, but that in addition to his professional work, he served on the village council for your community. Could you tell us a little bit more about what happened that to your family that forced your husband to leave Africa and why that happened?
First of all, thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you very much, Pear. I'm so delighted to be here and to share a bit of my story. Yes, much as my husband had a professional job, he was involved in community organization. He was a member of the local council, and this council was charged with the safety and well-being of the community. So he was a member of that council, but afterwards, things started to change, and he did not like the changes that were happening. When he spoke up about the injustices of false imprisonment, people being thrown in jail without due process, like trying to stand up for the little guy, he fell out with everybody and they labeled him as somebody who was disloyal. At first, we all brushed it off thinking it was a joke. But again, later on, more attacks and harassment surfaced.
Mary, for sharing that with us. Susan has told us that your husband was able to get to the United States. Could you tell us a little bit to what happened to you and the children staying behind? How did you survive?
Actually, when he got a chance to come, that also did not come easy because it was his co-workers who had realized what he was going through. He was so stressed, he was so scared, he was frightened for all of us. Our home had been invaded and like, it was a dark period for our life, for our family. So one of his co-workers helped him secure a visa to come. And for us who remained, this was also not easy for us because when they couldn't see him anymore, the harassment, the attacks, the scary tactics came over to me, asking me where he was, what had happened. And I didn't even know where he had gone, how he was faring, what was happening. It was just like I can't even say, it was like a blurry, like I had no idea where, like what he was going through himself over here. And I'm sure he was also scared about what was going on with us. So when I started facing questions and like I had to look behind over my shoulder all the time, thinking that we could be attacked again, and now he was not at home. Me and my extended family, we decided I have to leave the home. I had to leave the 5 children in the suburbs and had to go like 4 hours away in the countryside. This was the best way I could take care of the kids to ensure their safety. So because they couldn't see, I wasn't there, the father was there, so the kids continued to live with the extended family. But this was also a torture for me who was away from them, couldn't be with them every day, could not even get any information from what my husband was doing. So that first year was really a torture for all of us.
Rosemary, were the children with you when you were all attacked?
Yes. Yes, it was the middle of the night. We were all sleeping and we were woken up by bangings on the doors. And with men dressed in military uniforms. I don't know whether they were government soldiers or anything, but they had military attire with them. Just scaring, like telling my husband to shut up. What does he think he is? Like employing all scary tactics. They were so mad. I thought we would be shot. But instead of like, I think we were lucky, they decided to shoot our pet, our beloved dog.
Mhm.
It was very emotional for us because we thought maybe by chance we escaped and the dog had to go. So we were all at home sleeping in the middle of the night when this happened.
Very difficult, scary. I know Elena has more questions for you.
Thank you, Rosemary, for sharing that with us. And I'm really sorry that your family had to go, you and your family had to go through that. But thank you again for sharing those difficult memories. I know that that's not something that you want to, but I'm grateful that we get to learn from this. So after everything that you and your family had gone through, how did it feel eventually to learn that your application to come to the US had been approved?
Actually, the news was great for us. But as I said, not knowing what we were going to, we did not have much expectations because we didn't know the lands where we were coming, but we were just so excited that we would be united as a family and that we would be living together. But again, we got I think I got information that his case had been approved. And I think it took us like 2 years before we could get here. So it took us another long time. So I was asking, so you say that we have been approved, why don't we come? The kids are all by themselves, why shouldn't we come? So there is another long process after getting the approval of your case from the judge here and having the family to come. It takes that is another painful time.
Yes. Very hard to be separated for your children for so long when you're doing it to protect them, to get to not be where they are in case someone is looking for you, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Very, very hard to go through that, not knowing how long it will take.
It was actually very, very difficult. Every time I had to rely on my extended family, my nephews, go see how they are, what's happening. But I'm glad for everybody was able to chip in. Yeah, everybody was, and his family too, they helped. They helped take care of the kids. So it was around the clock care. So I'm glad I had that support, but it was scary because you want to be their children. Remember, they were young.
Yes.
The last one, I think the last one was like barely a year. But again, I did not want to go with a kid out in the countryside because of the conditions out there. So I had to leave them here to stay with, all of them to stay at the same place.
So how did you feel, like, as Elena asked you, when you found out finally your applications had been approved so you could all come, and what was that process like for you?
Actually, that was a very exciting moment. At least I was confident that we would be reunited and that we would leave. So we started the process. Also, when you get that news that you've been approved to come, it's not like a 2 days or 1 day that you're gonna get your passport stamped to come. You have to go through other rigorous exams, physical exams, medical exams. And this takes time. And the children had different ages. So they have to go through all their shots at different times. So it took us almost 8 months before we finalized everything to come. Yeah, it was very stressful, but exciting at the same time. At least we had a hope that eventually we would be reunited.
Yes.
I can't imagine Rosemary having to do this all while being afraid of the government of your own country. But I'm sure you've shared with us the relief when you finally, at least the hope, when you were able to really think that you were going to be able to be reunited with your husband. You finally made it to the US. Can you tell us a little bit about your life after you arrived in the US?
Oh, well, I think immigrants see the United States with fresh eyes, actually. It was I cannot even imagine. I was just so elated. I was so happy. I was just ready to get into the system, to do better. I was just so excited. And all the children, it showed on the children also were very excited. They were very happy, asking so many questions. And amazed at what we saw here as compared to where we are coming from. So it was just that moment when I relieved that, it's so emotional because I remember when I landed on American soil. It was so emotional, it was so fulfilling, and it was a joy for our family at that moment.
Rosemary, I remember when you came off the plane, everyone was dressed so beautifully, you had the kids in such special outfits. I'll never forget, when I travel with my kids, they're just in sweatpants, and a t-shirt or something like that. Your kids were dressed so beautifully. It was like so clear that it was such a special occasion to be entering US soil, I'll never forget that.
Yeah, it was. And the layovers, they were asking, have we reached? Are we there yet? I said, not yet. Another time. So everybody said, I think that excitement also, like, eventually, as we go ahead, I'm gonna say it will help them, like, propel them to get better, to work harder. And they are also glad to be here. Much as they were still young, they were between the ages of 11 and 2.5 to 11 years. But they still, some of them remember how it was. And they were so happy to be here, all of us to be under the same roof. So it was a very joyous moment for us.
I'm sure, Rosemary, that as happy as everyone was, I'm sure you faced a lot of challenges here, but what did you do to overcome those challenges?
Of course, like anywhere, beginnings are tough. And it was hard to navigate here and there, the system. But we had, the first help we had was the help from SNAPs. We had the food stamps for some time.
And that's because you were entitled to that, just for the audience, because as a refugee status, you were entitled to that.
Yes,
the law allowed that. Yeah.
I know the law allowed that, but it was, but it was for a very short time, actually. It was like just a few months to set us off. So we had that in the beginning. Then I had to get access to the school system. There was a lot of things for me to learn myself as a mother and to guide the children, and just getting settled in was like not so easy. But with the help of members from my church, I was connected to church, friends, with the help from Susan. And we got a casework here in Mold, where we live. So it was like, we had a lot of help. Like, to navigate the system, but it wasn't really it wasn't very easy, but we managed.
What about the English, the kids, the English language?
Can
you the kids know English when they came?
Well, no, of course they didn't. They didn't know English. They were speaking the mother tongue, and maybe the oldest two who had been in school could speak some English, but the last three did not know any word of English. So going to school was strange for them, but they were very eager to learn. I had to put them into English as a second language for them classes, which helped them a lot. But I think there's a way children can learn things quickly. I think within like a few months, they had grasped the English language. All of a sudden, I come home and they can't speak in my mother tongue anymore. So they learned the English so fast, but it was a challenge when they went to school.
What about you? How did you manage for yourself working?
Actually, when I came here, because I had the children, not one children, but 5 children, and the youngest was less than 3 years, I decided to take up a job at the school. Back home, I had been a high school teacher, but when I got here, I wanted to go into the elementary school, just to be in the school where the kids were going, so I could go with them in the morning and come back in the evening. So I took up a job as a paraprofessional for some time, I think for about a year or 2, and then changed. So that was basically to help us like get acclimated to the place and know our way around. Yes.
Thank you, Rosemary. I know that in her book, Susan shares how you worked nonstop, having a full-time job.
Actually, from the school system, I realized that the children were growing and of course the needs were getting bigger. And so I decided to work around the clock. Besides, I did not want to live on handouts like food stamps. I said, no, I can do better than this. So I decided to work, I put my schedule around the children's schedule and worked nights, worked days, worked weekends, anytime I would get. But this doesn't mean that I left the kids by themselves. I was always there when they were home. And also they had like after school programs, which helped them like finish their homeworks and stuff. Yeah, but I had to work around the clock. I had to took up many jobs. There's a time when I had like 3 jobs. I don't even know how I did them when I look back, but I managed to do that, to put food on the table, to clothe them, to give them books, and to do everything for them. Actually.
Thank you for sharing that, Rosemary. It's definitely impressive, and children are very lucky, as are we, to be able to hear your story. So just kind of to wrap us up, Rosemary, could you tell us what you and the children are up to today?
Right now, I'm pleased to say that all the 5 children have graduated college and they are busy in their fields. I have one who is a medical doctor. I have another one who graduated double major, political science and sociology. I have another one doing a doctorate program in civil and environmental engineering. I think he's really obsessed about the environment. I wish him luck. And I have another one just completing his graduate school in medical genetics. And another one was just graduated with a bachelor's in psychology. But I've been telling them that's not the end. They need to go further as much as they can. And I'm glad they are listening. Yes.
I'm just going to brag for you also that, you know, they all won incredible numbers of, you know, prizes and awards through school. And, you know, including the oldest 2, and many of them I think were A+ students for their entire college careers. And the oldest was, you know, top of his medical school class and just got a very prestigious fellowship in gastroenterology, right?
Yes.
At an Ivy League university. So, and they're all incredibly impressive young people who want to save the world and the rest of us and help us. So we couldn't be more grateful for that, Rosemary, and all that hard work you have done, you and your husband have done, it paid off.
It definitely seems that they're listening with your emphasis on education. How about you, Rosemary? What are you up to today?
So eventually I changed my passion from teaching and went into nursing. I've just graduated with my bachelor's in nursing. I'm now working as a psychiatry nurse and also working as a visiting nurse, visiting people in their homes, giving them nursing, skilled nursing care. That's what I'm doing right now.
Thank you, Rosemary. It's definitely impressive, and thank you for sharing that with us and for everything that you are doing. I think we were hoping to open it up to some questions, or if that makes sense at the moment.
Yeah, I think that it does. I think before we open it up to questions, Elena and Rosemary, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I can't tell you how much it means, I think, to all of us that you're willing to open up and share candidly the kinds of experiences that you've gone through, to give everyone a more intimate understanding of what the circumstances can be like for people who come under very trying conditions and manage to put one foot in front of the other and, you know, just overcome, you know, the kinds of things that some of us might not have been able to overcome. So I'm grateful to you for your strength and resilience and your willingness to share. I know Elena is. We're all grateful to you. And, you know, it's a privilege to be here with you and to feature you and your family in the book. I thought maybe, Elena, you could comment for a minute before we open it up for questions about some of the differences in the way the system works now, you know, in 2021 compared to the time when Rosemary and her family came, which was quite a few years ago. Even then, it took, you know, almost 2 years for her to be reunited with the family when they came. And it wasn't as bad then as it is now. Can you speak a little bit, just so everyone gets the context of today's world, and how long a typical asylum case might take today, and how long it might take for the family to be reunited following the approval of the case, and add all of those years together, and what do we come up with in terms of family separations?
Thank you, Susan. And I think the hurdles that Susan discusses in her books have just been, as you can see, getting worse over the years. And as Rosemary showed, it was definitely not easy when they went through the process, and slow, but that is even more so the case now. Our asylum cases are taking anywhere from like 3 to 7 years at the moment, and this is just for a person's case to be heard. The principal, the person here, so like Rosemary's husband in the US, just for his case to even be heard before a judge or before the asylum office. And so after, let's say, anywhere from 3 to 7 years in the adjudication of that case, then you begin the process of family reunification. And that process has been, I started at PAIR in 2014, so 7 years ago. I still have family petitions lurking around from when I started at PAIR as an attorney. Right now, I would say that it is typical for family petition cases. So like once someone has been granted asylum, to try to bring their family over here to take, I would say, like easily 3 to 5 years. And that's, and it could be much more. It's taking just like 2 years for the US to approve it. And then the consular processing, the process abroad in the country, which, as Rosemary discussed, it's incredibly daunting. Traveling takes months. So just to get it here, it's taking multiple years. And really everything is just becoming much more complicated. Asylum seekers in the US have lost their eligibility to apply for, in many instances, to apply for work permits while they're seeking asylum. So that means that someone is waiting 7 years to even have their cases heard. And in some cases don't have the ability, to apply for a work card, don't have the ability to apply for a work card while their applications are pending. So these are individuals who suffered trauma back home, who now have no ability, are kind of caught in this limbo for many years, having to provide for and try to help families back home who have needs. We've lost eligibility for work cards to do those petitions. The ones that we are able to do are taking many more years. I've seen in the 7 years I've been at PAIR and doing this work at PAIR, in crazy changes, things I didn't even thought were possible. We hear, people being forced to wait in other countries, even when they present themselves at our borders, seeking sent back to other countries to request asylum. So it really has really draconian changes, really kind of working our way up to things that someone who, like me, has been doing this for 7 years, I didn't even imagine were possible when I started doing this work. But very long process, a lot of uncertainty, and then less benefits. And I say benefits, ability to just hold on while the case is processing. But we've seen
Such a daunting thing, and I think just we speak about it a lot in the book as well, that the kindness and volunteerism of all of us to help immigrants going through this very difficult process. It can be the difference between hope and despair for so many people, knowing that there's someone out there who cares and is going to give a helping hand, empathize with what the person is going through, and help them, even just cheer them up, through the process, take them out for a lunch or do something kind, can make an enormous difference in somebody's life when they're going through such a long, lengthy, unknown kind of process, when there's so many years that go by when you don't know and you have anxiety, right, about whether you're going to be able to stay, to be safe, or in many cases with asylum cases, if you're sent back, sometimes it's going to be to a jail or worse. So I want to just make sure that people know that in the book, you kind of read through these stories and you can feel what the person is feeling who's going through this process, and become much closer to it in that way. And then maybe when we're living our lives and doing everything else we do in our lives, when we come across immigrants, we can be that much more sensitive and reach out in friendship, even if you don't volunteer in any organization. Just to extend a hand of friendship can mean the world to so many people. Rosemary, I'm sure you feel that was the case for you when people reached out.
Yes, it was. It was very encouraging when actually, like, I think somebody stands out so much. Like the principal of the elementary school where I was teaching, she was very instrumental in helping the kids, like putting them into after-school programs. Yeah, and transporting, enabling them to have transportation from school to home, which wasn't easy because I think when we were not in that radius of the school bus system. So, but she managed to walk around that and said, you know what, you have 5 kids, how are you gonna bring them on the bus? So a lot helped that. And then I had another friend of mine who connected me to a tutor. So I got a tutor for the kids she's an amazing lady who tutored them right from elementary until they were ready to go to college. So there are people who have reached out. I can say many people have reached out, and you, Susan, too. You opened your house to our family. I remember all the Thanksgiving dinners we shared the first 10 years of our being here. So it has been amazing. I've had people who have really helped us a lot.
Thank you, Rosemary. And Elena, Amanda, and Belmont Books. We want to see, right, if there are any questions. So are there any questions in the chat?
We have a few, and most of them are for Rosemary.
Oh, okay. That's fine.
So we'll start with Jane's question, who asked, and you might have answered this listing all of your children's accomplishments, but how did the children adjust socially to school? Were they able to make friends?
Oh yeah, they made friends, and they were into school sporting teams. Yeah, it was easy for them. Also, when they got the language part out of the way, they made friends so quickly. My children are very social. They have friends, and yeah, they integrated pretty well after the language barrier, which was actually very short, because the classes of English as a second language, they used to do this after school, helped them a lot to learn the English language. And actually one of them who did political science and sociology is a very, very good writer. So yeah, they integrated very well.
Susan asks, Rosemary, were there other people here from your country with whom you could speak your mother tongue and share familiar foods and other things? Also, how did everyone adjust to the cold?
The first, actually, people in my country, I did not see them at first because I think my first year was focused on like getting integrated here, integrating my children here, and finding a footing. But later on, somebody connected me to a church in another town where I found a number of people who could teach, who could like speak my language. And I've continued to be a member of that community until now. Adjusting to the cold, that was a challenge. That was a challenge. I think our first Thanksgiving here, we had like, I think 2 feet of snow. And I remember the children couldn't walk in the snow. Everybody was just falling. But we adjusted very well right now. We don't feel the cold anymore.
We have another question from Doug, who says, thank you for sharing your challenging and also uplifting story. Have you ever thought about writing a book about your family's journey?
Actually, my brother, who does not live here, he lives back home, has been asking me to write a book, but I don't know whether I have the capacity, whether I can write one. I haven't thought about it, but a number of people have asked me about writing a book about my story. I'll think about it, probably.
And then we have a pending question for Susan. And everyone, you're welcome to submit more questions. We have about 10 minutes, so there's plenty more time to answer questions. Michael asks, what legal advice did Rosemary need and receive in order to come to America?
That's a good question, because it might not be something that people really think about, but our documentary requirements for showing family relationships to someone who has already received an immigration benefit, they're very stringent. And oftentimes in foreign countries, it's difficult for people to secure the official documents that they need to show the American embassy to be able to be granted status as a dependent, a spouse, or a child of someone who's gotten status here. So as I remember, there were a lot of communications back in the day about all of the documents that Rosemary would need to present regarding her marriage to her husband and the birth certificates of the children. And I can see Elena's nodding her head, because oftentimes these are very severe challenges. Right now, I actually have a case for an Afghan human rights activist. Fortunately, I was able to get into the country, but her husband needs to get out. And we fortunately just escaped Afghanistan, thank goodness, which is not the case, unfortunately, for so many other people who are still inside Afghanistan under very difficult conditions right now. But they don't have a marriage document. Fortunately, Rosemary had a marriage document.
I had one.
Yeah, and if you hadn't, things would have gone it might not have worked out so well. It's very difficult sometimes to get the required civil documents to prove relationships, and our government is really, really strict about that. And oftentimes men have to take DNA tests to prove paternity. And if you read the book, there's a very interesting story about that in the book. And I won't give it away, but it's worth reading. Let's just say that. So there was a lot of advice about that. And then Rosemary, you also had a scare right before you came. Want to tell the audience a couple of minutes about the incredibly scary thing that happened at the very end, right when we thought everything was ready and you were about to come?
So we had our tickets, and we had our boarding pass. We had our visas in our passports. We went to the airport, got the boarding passes, checked in our luggage, and when we reached the immigration officer, he says, why are you taking all these kids? Are you like, so it was very difficult. He said, you cannot go with these kids. Where is their father? We need to see their father. He must come and sign a document to let you take the kids. So we were put off the plane and our luggage, the plane had to wait and offload our luggage. That was very traumatic, you know, like you are so excited, everybody has bid you farewell, you are going, and then boom, you don't go. That was very scary, very traumatic. And so we had to wait for like, I think another 7 days before we could work out that. Yeah, it was very scary.
Yeah, your heart must have sunk. And I know we were all worried. And, you know, right up into the last moment, you know,
Exactly.
getting
Not
here.
until the plane was off the ground did we
Right.
believe that finally everything is gonna be okay. Yeah.
And you made it. You made it. You all made it.
Thanks a lot. Yeah.
And your family is just an amazing family. And I'm in awe as a mother. I am in awe of you and everything you did, working nonstop, 2-3 jobs, never sleeping, determined to contribute and have your children contribute to this country. And you're like so many other immigrants, but you're a pretty special person, Rosemary. I mean, there are not that many who are just like you, I have to say. Yeah, I've told you many times you're one of heroes. And I'm so happy to feature you here tonight in the book. But, you know, the book tells the stories, just like Rosemary's story and her family's story, of how we're a nation of immigrants and they're lifting us up in so many ways, doing things for us on the front lines of COVID. And in so many, like Rosemary is a nurse and her oldest son is a doctor. And during COVID, he was there every day in a very major hospital in Boston. And they're all contributing in different ways. And most immigrants are contributing in really important ways. And they're giving back and they're paying their taxes and they're not taking from the system. They're giving and they're creating jobs and they're creating value and cultural connections and diversity and richness and adding to the fabric of our country. So we want to celebrate that in the book, to celebrate Rosemary and your family and all the other people featured in the book. So really excited to have the stories get out into the world so that the world can read about people like you, Rosemary, and understand more about what this is really like.
I think we don't have any more pending questions. So any final thoughts, Susan, Elena, or Rosemary, before we close for the night?
Rosemary?
I just want to say, to give my thanks again to you and to Elena and to this country for welcoming us and giving us the opportunity and giving my children the opportunity to succeed. I can't say it was very easy, but with the resilience and determination and hard work. And that's what I've been telling them, and they're really working hard. You can succeed, you can succeed. So I'm just so happy to be here. And I'm so happy to speak on behalf of many immigrants. But the immigrant story may be different from others, but the path is the same. So the hardships are the same, but you just have to stay focused and be resilient and chase your goals.
Thank you. Just as a reminder, I'm going to put a link again in the chat where you can buy Susan's book. Thank you all so much for coming tonight, the attendees and all of the people on panel, Elena, Susan, and Rosemary. This was a wonderful discussion. If you came in halfway through or you missed some of this discussion, I believe we recorded the event and it'll go up on our YouTube channel within 48 to 72 hours. So be on the lookout for that. We'll send you a nice thank you email afterwards with all of that information. And thank you so much again for everyone attending tonight.
Thank you, Belmont Books, for hosting this. And thank you, everyone out there.
Thank you, and everyone have a good holiday.
Happy holidays.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.